Welcome, everybody, to this week's episode of the Trip Sitting Podcast, where today we have Joe Moore, who is the co-founder and CEO of Psychedelics Today. Now, for those that don't know, Psychedelics Today is one of the largest psychedelics media platforms that exists today, and actually one of the first platforms that I definitely remember going to very, very often in order to get a lot of information surrounding what's going on in the psychedelic space, as well as just general questions that I would have. So I'm really, really excited to have Joe on the podcast. He was actually one of those guests where at the beginning of the podcast, when I first created it, he was one of the people that I really wanted to have on. So this is a really cool full circle moment for me to actually get to do that. And we had a really, really amazing conversation about his background, which I won't get too into right now. We talk about psychedelics today, obviously, and really just anything and everything that comes to our minds regarding philosophy, psychedelics, music, and anything else. So thank you all for tuning in. And before we start, if you wouldn't mind also giving this podcast a like and then also maybe rating it as well, just so we can appear in more searches when people go to check us out. And then also make sure that you subscribe so you don't miss any other episodes, and give us a follow on social media at tripsitting.blog on both Instagram and TikTok. Now, here is Joe Moore.
Jerry Garcia had a line, "This time around I chose fun." I always appreciate that.
Perfect. as I'm wearing my my Dead and Company shirt here. Unfortunately, never got to see Jerry Garcia. Have you ever seen like the Grateful Dead, like the original?
No, it would have been cool. I I think I came around a little too late. I saw them. Yeah, like I would have been like 12, 13 years old when Jerry. I think it was 12 or 13 when Jerry died.
Gotcha.
I remember where I was. I was at a dude ranch in upstate New York. Kind of like, you know, you'll never forget where you were when you found out 9/11 or JFK. I'm like, Jerry Garcia for me.
Yeah. Were your parents deadheads?
Not explicitly, but like, you know, peripheral to the scene for sure.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So my first question that I want to ask you has to do with you being a DJ. And I want to know, how did you first get started with that?
Well, I think I got my first paid gig when I was in high school. I think I was DJing people's graduation parties. I had a cousin, Mark. He introduced me to all sorts of really interesting electronic music acts. Like we didn't really have an in-person relationship. It was kind of an interesting, exclusively like online messenger. This is pre voice over IP even. And I was getting like a little bit too young introduced to like rave culture, rave music. And actually it's the first time I've actually ever shared this story publicly, I think. So good luck.
Awesome.
And good work. So yeah, we actually made some songs together. We throw samples back and forth. And, you know, I didn't have tables or anything or did vinyl stuff, but we were using a Winamp at the time, and we would have access to crazy amount of music through sharing and Napster and all this stuff. And it was amazing to have tons of music that nobody else had, right? It was kind of like a got to catch 'em all thing. Turned into a compulsion and addiction for sure. Just like, how many gigabytes of music do you really need when you're 17 or 16? And you could say that about vinyl, but thankfully my music just fit on hard drives, right? Yeah. And then later I was like, you know, I really love music. Why don't I get into it a little more? I've, you know, on and off been playing guitar forever. I have a singing habit as well. So, you know, DJing was like a accessible next step to actually, you know, help people have more fun. You know, I years and years ago, I had some line on the podcast about how we really want to democratize partying and fun. Like, does it really need to be $70 every time you want to go see a show? What if it was free and it was a DJ that you really liked? And yeah, and it just it helps cultivate community, and there's so many reasons.
Yeah. Hearing you say that just reminds me that, I mean, since I've been here, I don't know if you're a Grizz fan at all, but like he puts on these like cool free pop-up shows at Denver, and he's one of the only DJs that I know that like really consistently does that.
Yeah. Um, yeah, didn't they do something in like a junkyard recently, and like Maddie
Hmm.
O'Neill was there? It looked really good. I was out of town. Otherwise, that looks like a really good situation. Why don't they? Is like the question, right? Like, does everything really need to be economically based? Um,
Yeah, it's really interesting to think about it, like, because I mean, the amount of people like me, like I was never like a really gigantic Grizz fan by any means and didn't listen to it. And it wasn't until that I actually really started following him and seeing what he does like for the community and how much he truly likes music. That's what made me then like get into it, is seeing the fact that like how much he genuinely cares about his fans.
right. It's compelling when you see that kind of thing, and it seems rare, maybe.
Yeah.
But it's super important, and it's quite the interesting scenario when yeah, the superstar starts to care about, like, the least well amongst the
Hmm.
fans, right? It's pretty cool, and
Yeah.
it's about time, right? Because he has plenty of resources too, and
Hmm.
that helps quite a bit.
Yeah, for sure. So, you mentioned that you might have gotten into the party and rave scene, I guess, a bit too young. So now I do want to ask, I guess, when was your first psychedelic experience?
Way later. So I got into the music. I didn't get into the scene. I
Okay.
wish I got into the scene, but uh, the first substance induced experience that was noteworthy was probably ayahuasca, and it was probably in like 2008. I did
Okay.
a number of years of holotropic breathwork before I came around to actually trying substance.
Hmm. So is the holotropic breath work, is that what I guess sort of opened your mind to different altered states?
Um, that was definitely like the first gateway. Like,
Hmm.
I certainly had a pretty robust drinking habit, and cannabis smoking habit in my undergrad. And yeah, for whatever reason, I guess, I don't know. Maybe I watched too many of the Jackass movies. Like, people didn't really want to give me substance. Um, so I'm okay with that. And I was reading Stanislav Grof starting my first year in my undergrad, so learning about LSD psychotherapy and the really big history. So I did a lot of holotropic breath work starting 2003 till that point in time that I decided to jump into the psychedelic arena fully.
Hmm. And
Um,
that's
mhm.
around the same time too that you actually started your company, Boston Holotropic, correct?
Oh, yeah, I can't call it mine.
Okay.
It's a few friends and I, yeah, just wanted a name to do breath work under.
Hmm.
And yeah, we got together. I actually just saw they're doing more events today. I don't know what their dates are, but they just announced a bunch. I'm
That's
happy
awesome.
for them. Glad they're still going.
Yeah, I guess what was the experience like of, doing holotropic breath work with people at a time where that probably wasn't nearly as much of a buzzword as it is now, and not as many people have really heard about it.
Um, it's pretty weird, honestly. It's like, why on earth would somebody want to trust me with their, weekend or their
Mhm.
psyche, right? And never mind that. Like, what a weird sell. Start breathing, and all these weird things happen that are really helpful for you. Like, it's a tough sales pitch, but I I I got frustrated here and there. I figured that when I came to Boulder, I'd be able to do this stuff all the time. Not the case. um, expense and interest like just made it so that I only did a couple smaller ones, I think, in that period of time, especially
Mhm.
in Boulder. It was good. It was definitely worth it, but complicated for sure. Um, but really the ask is, hey, why don't you try it for 15 minutes with me, and
Mhm.
it'll kind of be clear that something's happening. And you'll probably want to go further, but your call, right?
I think that's a relatively easy sell, and especially given breath work. Like I've had some pretty interesting experiences with breath work before, and it was something that until I mean, until actually I went on an ayahuasca retreat last year in September, I had never even heard of breathwork or done breathwork before. It was just one of the things that we did on our like off days. And I was like, oh my God, there's very much something here.
Yeah. Yeah. Isn't it fascinating? I think it's a really good, um, let's see, integration tool, preparation and integration tool for psychedelic experiences. So the way we kind of frame it inside my world is like, you don't really need more than like 1 to 3 big psychedelic experiences with substance. Like that should be enough, assuming they were a big enough dose. And then breathwork should be good for the rest of your life. You know, if there's some sort of medical condition, and this is in terms of like maintenance, right? Like not necessarily like, oh, you develop cancer and breathwork's fine. It's like, you know, more so like a good supplement to a healthy lifestyle.
Yeah. Sort of when you're at those, like, I kind of like to say when you're at those like kind of crossroads in your life, or like just feeling off, feeling down, like that's something I can use to sort of get me out of that funk and like help me really like identify back into my body. And then it helps then bring up those experiences that I've had from the psychedelics of, oh, okay, this is what I'm working on right now. Like now I'm back to baseline. Like I'm grounded again.
Like Tony Robbins does this a lot. He calls it like state change. This is similar. He gets it from neurolinguistic programming, which is a really interesting thing that people should check out if they're curious. And changing your state can change how you perform in different situations. And it's definitely definitely an interesting deal, you know, to be able to change state and therefore have different results in different scenarios.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting talking to people that are not, into sort of the spiritual world, like, are still kind of anti-psychedelics and don't have any sort of practices like that. It's interesting just hearing the pushback from it and a lot of the reasons. And then me just thinking back to the history of how humans have been like documented using altered states of consciousness for different purposes throughout our entire history. Like, it's not like this is something new that we're looking at, but like so many people are just so conditioned to not think of alcohol as a drug and then think of all of these other things that have been deemed bad, like, essentially as like bad drugs for you, even though there's just not really a difference between the two as far like you're still altering your state.
How crazy is it that this whole word drug, and like it, by its appropriate definition, it hits a lot of substances, a lot of substances, and popular imagination based, that's inherited lots of propaganda, has assumed culture's definition that drugs equal bad, wasteful, when in fact, like, drugs save lives, right? Chemo drugs, ibuprofen, fentanyl is really actually an amazing medicine when it's used in the hospital. There's so many things out there, and you're just throwing things out, right? Like, oh, we're fine. Like, ayahuasca is all I need. It's like, there's a lot of substances, guys, that can be really helpful given the situation, right? Like,
yeah.
Not every scenario requires a spoon, but when you have a job that needs a spoon, it's an amazing tool.
Yeah, we talk about set and setting in psychedelics, but like set and setting is really the scenario for every single type of drug. Like they all have a purpose in the right set and setting. I think that specifically, the fact that that's so tied to psychedelics, I think kind of needs to get tied to all of these other substances that we use and put in our body.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah. There's so much conversation that needs to be had. I heard a line. I was at a conference in downtown Denver on Saturday, a psychedelic conference that was poorly marketed, but it was a really fun time.
I did not even hear of this, and I live here. That's so unfortunate. Oh my gosh.
Good. So I heard this line there. Thomas Jefferson, being quite the philosopher, said, self-medication is a right as sacred to us as the right to free speech. So self-medication, here what he's saying. He was growing cannabis, he was growing opium, I'm sure. And yeah, like the fact that we ended up in this weird situation today, like moral compulsions, like blackmail, all this weird stuff, as a result of the drug war. It's not a great scene for a
Now,
country that
there's
was
a
founded with people saying stuff like that.
no, it's interesting how how we hold on to certain parts of our history and then completely disregard the rest of it. Like it's not like it in my opinion, it should be sort of an all or nothing thing. Like take it as it was that these were again like imperfect humans creating these laws for us.
Mm-hmm.
And while they were like also contradicting them at the exact same time that they were making them, and yet for whatever reason we feel like the need to uphold the moral standards of these people that had different morals.
Right? So weird. So weird. And a thing that people do, it's called like historical chauvinism, and it's not really great. It's like people in history, they should be living by 2023 standards, and if they didn't, they're the worst people in the world, and you can never talk about them again, right? It's not really a fair look at history, because
No.
if you were there, you would probably be doing very similar shit, right?
We do the same thing. I
Um,
mean, it's all about how you are raised and what's put into your brain as you're growing up. And like again, there's just different standards back then. So if that's what you grow up simply believing your whole life,
yeah,
why would you believe anything else? You don't have a reason to believe everything else, especially when you have no access to really anything, probably outside of your very, very small community. Like there was no internet, there was no even like, mail took forever
mm-hmm,
at that point. Like it wasn't easy to just get all of these different viewpoints and points of view. So like your scope is looking through a pinhole.
mm-hmm, exactly. Yeah, it's the view always needs to be expanded. And that's why I think it's really crucial for folks to be studying a lot of history and also further science fiction. Terence McKenna, Timothy Leary, and others were very big fans of science fiction because it was a way um, to explore new ideas in really impactful ways um, and really work things out in a way that wasn't
Hmm.
just like dry philosophy or something along
Yeah.
those lines. Yeah.
What are some of your favorite science fiction books
The
or
Foundation
authors?
series is really, really good. I think that was Asimov. It's really important. It's the reason, in my opinion, that Musk founded SpaceX is the
Hmm.
Foundation series. We need a multiplanetary species in the event of some sort of catastrophe. It'll make recovery possible,
Hmm.
as opposed to impossible, right? Imagine if we had all the books and all the scholars out there that could come back and help fix things if stuff got really worked here. Um, you know, that's the Foundation trilogy, or it could even be more than a trilogy at this point. It's an amazing one. I really like Dune, of course. Stranger in a Strange Land was really amazing. I think that was Heinlein, like just the classics, like Philip K. Dick. If people haven't read much of Philip K. Dick, you
Hmm.
should. It's really good fodder for existential crises. Same with like Franz Kafka. It's like really good fodder for your psychedelic experiences, and to feel that stuff. Um, you don't. It would be amazing if we could just feel good all the time, but it's a kind of a limited range, right? It's like playing the guitar only on like the top 5 frets,
Hmm.
or only hitting like the black keys on the keyboard when you could like. There's a lot of keys out there, and we
Yeah.
should understand the full range of human experience. I think. Um, yeah.
I'm in complete agreement there. I mean, you wouldn't have the good without the bad. You wouldn't have the happy without the sad, like the love without the pain. Like they're all opposites and like,
Yeah.
the point of our consciousness and sort of the way we understand things. Like I think we're supposed to feel it all. Like that's our jobs as humans is to feel all of the things that we are been given by God, universe, source, creator, whatever you want to call it. But, you know, we wouldn't have these feelings if they weren't necessary. And yet we want to sort of, at least this is really my personal journey is like growing up, like I was always just trying to control the experiences that I have. Like I don't want to feel bad, so I'm going to only try to control my situations so I feel good all of the time, not understanding just how limited I was and what I was doing and how I was thinking.
Yeah. Agreed. Agreed. It's a big topic that we should lean into.
Mm-hmm. So I do want to ask, you said that your first experience was with ayahuasca. What made you choose ayahuasca as your first psychedelic experience?
um, the way everybody talked about it, primarily.
Mm-hmm.
It looked like a really sexy drug. It was like, had magic. It had, um, there was risk, there was scary, there was amazing things that could happen. And people seemed to always come out better on the other side, like healthier, happier. That was my perception at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And, yeah, and it was in this kind of like fringes of the Burning Man movement. Like I was trying to get to know a lot of those people at the time, and I was hearing leads about like different organizations doing it. So I, really took my time, really made sure I went with somebody that I could trust. And yeah, that's kind of how that went.
Could you describe some of that first experience and sort of how it changed you and
Mm.
maybe put you on this path that you went on since then?
Yeah. So there's an incredible amount of stress. In the first 15 minutes, I asked for the big cup. I showed up. This is all domestic. I
Mm-hmm.
showed up. There's like Shipibo folks running the show. There was a lot of kind of South American people kind of helping coordinate everything. And which is good. It's about 40 people. It's maybe a little too big, but it worked out fine. And I asked for the biggest cup because I'd been reading so much Leary, McKenna, etc. And I'm like, yeah, whatever. I'm ready for this. I understand I need to like sacrifice myself to myself. So
Like I've done my breath work. I'm ready.
Yeah, I've done a lot of internal work, right? So exactly, that's kind of what I was thinking. And thank goodness I did, right? I asked for the big cup. I really got my butt kicked. Sat down next to somebody before we even got started. And he's like, I'm really just thankful to be sitting next to you. This is my first time. And you just have this like really calming presence. I was like, well, hate to tell you, but this is my first time too. Yeah. So massive amounts of fear and terror on the come up. The purge was actually really pleasant. I actually really appreciated that part of it. And then, just tons and tons and tons of content. I was like, certainly not like full ego dissolution at this point, but like getting worked through tons and tons and tons of biographical material, talking to dead relatives, all the works, like perhaps past life experiences. Like I don't love to say yes it was or yes it wasn't for me, but it was a big experience. And then hours later I come up and the whole world's like rainbows and diamonds and just sparkly as shit, and I was like walking on sunshine for a long time. When I went in, I had definitely had some depression, and on the other side, that was not there anymore. My meditation practice was really consistent. There was a good qigong practice going. It's like really, really a good time in my life. Like the next like 6-9 months after that.
Nice. So I guess after that sort of 6 to 9 months, what was the change, and then how did you kind of go from there, and like how did your relationship with psychedelics evolve from that point?
Huh. So that was my only time with ayahuasca. And
Okay. And it was just the
I
one
was growing
ceremony.
mushrooms. Yeah, I've only had one experience. I was growing mushrooms before this. I was giving them to friends. I was trying to eat them for whatever reason. I couldn't figure out to not eat with them. I figured that out these days. You eat 30 minutes before or something, that's probably fine. But it was kind of complicated and weird. So I started eating them. That was interesting. I things really kicked into overdrive for me when I started actually going to see the band Fish all the time, and
Mm.
like lots and lots and lots of consumption, maybe too much, and well, definitely too much. And I was going to nightclubs all the time, seeing like jam bands and like different kinds of things. So it's like that's just kind of what you did in as part of that environment. So I'm like, yeah, all right, this is fucking great. I get to do all this stuff all the time. It's the most fun ever every time. Like obviously there's some fear and risk and that kind of stuff. And I'm into fear and risk, right? I live in Breckenridge for a reason. And yeah, it became a really interesting part of my life. I don't really want to take any of it back. I probably would have been a little healthier if I could with my
Hmm.
decisions, but yeah, that was amazing, and it was a really good way to just dig in crazy deep on a lot of this stuff. And in real time, I'm doing philosophy. I'm actually like saying, "Oh, this is what I studied. This is like that person's kind of difficult looking experience. Like I kind of understand this better."
Hmm.
And it was kind of like real world philosophy, real world kind of, well, what do we call it? Applied philosophy. Yeah. And and I was still doing a lot of breath work. I was doing a lot of that before I left for Colorado. And I did some in Colorado, but it's really faded off. My personal work has definitely faded off because I'm so focused now on Psychedelics Today. I am, though, going to a 5-day breathwork retreat in like 2 weeks. So
Nice.
that'll be really good. I'll learn a lot more about body work and the tradition, and that'll be good. And yeah, so primarily big kind of like psychonauty, if not like recreational experiences. And,
Hmm.
not necessarily with like a systematic approach or any kind of goal, but I think the psychedelic stuff has got me through, long hauler COVID, like faster COVID recovery. I just had a monstrous concussion. I believe psychedelics are helping me heal my concussion and traumatic brain injury, which is good. It's still not all the way, but I'm seeing good progress.
Hmm.
Um,
Do you mostly just microdose now?
no, I kind of like rib people when they like microdose. Why would you do that? Now, I like I would say they're just not like 10 strips. Like I had one experience at a festival where it was like 10 to 20 hits of LSD, somewhat accidental.
What?
And yeah, so like you survive, right? You learn
Yeah.
some lessons, and then you learn, oh, I have to be a lot more careful with liquid LSD. Um,
I know literally somebody who just had liquid LSD and just spilled a bunch in his lap at like 10 p.m. and was like, well, now I got to deal with this. And he dealt with it, but he's like, yep, I learned a lot of things about myself and I got to be more careful.
so one thing to like just, I think this is a harm reduction thing. So liquid LSD, thank goodness, unless there's some sort of added agent, does not go through your skin. So there needs to
Uh,
be. So perhaps what he did was like, oh,
there was
yeah,
there
I'll
was
just lick
there
all
was
this up.
alcohol in it.
Like sometimes alcohol can help. I think there's other agents that are more aggressive to go transdermal, but alcohol, I haven't heard if alcohol does it or not, but there's a chance. So people
Hmm.
should research that. What makes liquid LSD go through your skin, and
Yeah.
yeah, because you can touch pieces of bladder acid, and it's like usually pretty safe and fine. Like
Hmm.
what do you get, 1 or 2 micrograms on your fingers, and you can lick them, and you probably won't even notice whatsoever.
Yeah.
Probably, folks. Probably. It's
would you
not a
say that
guarantee.
would you say that LSD now is more your psychedelic of choice?
I really like it. I really like mushrooms. I really love 2CB. Really love MDMA.
I actually don't know a lot about 2CB.
Uh,
What exact like what makes it different from, the other sort of classical psychedelics as well as also MDMA?
mm, so like the easy answer
Mm.
is 2CB feels like something in between LSD and MDMA. In my opinion, that's not a really fair assumption because it's so different too.
Mm.
Um, in some ways, I feel like it's tripping with um, like bumper bowling. Bumper bowling. It's kind of
Yeah,
like that for a psychedelic experience. It's in my experience, my mind's not getting as twisted up in circles as it can and with LSD or psilocybin, right? Still
yeah,
kind of like a coherent narrative. You're still having like really interesting trippy sensations, and it's a mescaline derivative, so you're
got
getting
it. I was
some
gonna
of
ask.
that quality, except you're only consuming um, like 20 to 30 milligrams in a night instead of
Gotcha.
like mescaline. You're taking like a half gram, like 300 milligrams to like a full gram or something, if you're taking that as your drug of choice.
Hmm.
um I just find it exquisite. A lot of people really like having sex on 2CB. I haven't done that yet somehow. But it's a really interesting experience for sure. And one that I plan to have many more of.
Gotcha. Do you ever are you ever, I guess, under the influence of psychedelics as you like when you DJ now, or do you usually try to go into those like really as
I
clear
try
as
to be
possible?
sober. I
Yeah.
try to be really sober. I'm not the most competent DJ. I love
Uh-huh.
doing it, but I really need to focus. And I did a set at Burning Man this year, and I was still a little high on MDMA, and I could like barely read. But for me, it was a life changing experience to be able to do that. It was a sunrise set, like way, way, way in a remote area, and it
Oh
was
man.
extraordinary. And one of my friends last night told me it was his favorite set of all of Burning Man. I'm like, well, your standards might be low, but awesome. I really appreciate really appreciate the kind words.
That's just pure love right there.
Right, probably yes. We had a lovely evening. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess transitioning into psychedelics today, what made you want to start that publication?
We started Psychedelics Today because the psychedelic field, as it stood, was not discussing transpersonal psychology enough, and this was the primary output of Dr. Stanislav Grof and a number of his peers was transpersonal psychology and holotropic breathwork. And without it, we think the psychedelic conversation just really isn't as interesting and perhaps impactful. To prepare somebody for the weirdest possible experiences is a big deal. Like acknowledging, yes, you might actually become Shiva in this period of time right here. We have no way to tell you what's going to happen, but there's let's give you a rundown of all the possibility. And then how do you work with somebody on the other side of that, right? Like some of these kind of behaviorist leaning people were working at this clinical trial I was somewhat close to. And one of my friends had a spontaneous mystical experience, not even drug induced, and was
Hmm.
talking to some of these psychedelic therapists there. And they would say, well, let's actually make this biological. Like, what can you tell us about your family that relates to this? And it's like totally cutting down the value of that experience for them, because the
Yeah.
mystical experience is one of the peak experiences we can have. And to say, oh, yeah, tell me about your father, as like a response to like, I just had this most amazing experience ever, ever, ever. You would never
Yeah.
believe that a human could have this. And then just cutting it down to make it like biological when it like wants to be in a different zone. Like to me, that's a pretty big violation. And unfortunately, it's the way that traditional psychology wants to operate, and we need to
Hmm.
challenge that and say, hey, your theories, while helpful and can be really useful, um, you're missing a lot of lived experience that should be included for your theory to actually be complete. And to me, that's my favorite way of critiquing it. You're actually throwing out data to make your theory cleaner, I guess. I don't know, more
Yeah.
sellable, more grant fundable. I don't know. Like we shouldn't throw out data when the data could inform a more holistic and a more appropriate, more helpful model.
Yeah. Well, it's just interesting because like the yeah, the way that science, looks at a mystical experience, it's essentially assuming that like, well, we don't have data on this, so therefore it doesn't exist. When you can't really look at data that way if all of these people are claiming these mystical experiences that are inherently unexplainable, but yet there's still so much consistency with them, like that has to be looked at.
What is that other than data, right?
Yeah.
It's like they'll say they don't have it, but they have it, right? It's just maybe not structured how they wanted it to. And is that a failing on the people that had that experience? Is it a failing on the researchers themselves criticizing it, right? Like I don't know. Or is it an issue with study design, right? Like how can we actually deeply listen to people going through this to come to like uh, a more realistic understanding of the psyche?
Yeah. So I do have one sort of hard hitting question for you. Not really
Uh,
that hard hitting, but I just want your opinion. So with the I'm sure you saw that like Epic Healing in Oregon just released their pricing for like the legal
Hmm.
therapeutic framework. And I just wanted to ask your opinion on what do you think are the biggest challenges to creating a legal framework that is also then accessible to the average individual?
So access is always going to be a hard issue, especially when um, espe- oh,
I know you weren't expecting
um,
this.
the regulators and well the people all think the voting public thinks that we need people to keep us safe from these things, and to me that's like the biggest error. Like yes, it's nice to have a regulated legal frame, but it still prohibits so much activity that
Mhm.
like this kind of legalization isn't exactly legalization. It's like a highly regulated, highly taxed, um, kind of like you guys can go be adults, but you have to go be adults and spend a lot of money and use this facility and hire somebody that went through this training, which, there's some merit to that, right?
Yeah.
But to me, it's just not a really great way for people to be treating one another when, when you look at these prices. Are mushrooms in the underground ever going to be more than $35 an eighth? Like 3.5 grams, everybody. Like that pricing has been, 25 to 35. That's been that way for years and years and years and years and years. And like to grow mushrooms, you could probably grow mushrooms for the rest of your life for like 20 to $100.
Yeah.
So like how are we then supposed to relate to this kind of pricing? Like I can't say it's a failure because it's going to really like a lot of people are going to come in and try to access this stuff in a legal way because a lot of people love to follow the law, and a lot of people want to have doctors there. Oregon, this is a non-clinical frame, so it's a little complicated, right? So um, can you like there's people with certain kinds of mental health diagnoses that are excluded, I believe. um, Colorado, when it is implemented, as far as we understand, it is a clinical frame. Doctors can be involved, therapists can be involved. The state will actually help protect your license from your license board in the state because, Colorado said, yeah, let's go a little further.
Yeah.
Let's actually make this like a doctory situation. That said, if the prices here at Epic Healing are like this, what happens when you start throwing medical doctors in the mix? Like,
Yeah.
is this now going to be a $20,000 offering for a single trip? Like, that's no one's going to buy
And then
that.
also getting insurance companies involved too.
So that conversation is, oh yeah, health insurance. So we're looking pretty good for like, Maps and Compass as far as their reimbursement goes. But I don't believe that extends into like these states yet.
Yeah.
Though that would be really interesting if like, you qualified for a psilocybin session every other year as part of your insurance program. Like that's kind
Hmm.
of an interesting idea. Um, uh, but what's happened in Colorado is we also voted in a really robust decriminalized framework where people can grow, um, gift, share. You can't sell your mushrooms, but you can
Yeah. But
grow and give them.
it's also legal to buy too. So like
Uh,
at me, isn't it like me as the buyer is technically protected, or is that still
you
legal
can
too?
receive if there's a
Okay, got
cash
it. Okay,
transaction. That's when it becomes not
okay,
okay.
okay.
But there's a lot of classic workarounds. I'm no attorney, so if you're gonna go here, get yourself a lawyer. But I saw people in cannabis, selling $20 to $50 stickers,
Hmm.
and then you would get cannabis gifted to you after you bought the
Yeah, there's
stickers, right?
my friend that used to live in Washington D.C. said when they rolled it out, they buy like a $35 T-shirt, like, oh my God, there's an eighth of weed in here. What? How did that get
How did
there?
yeah, Baltimore was doing it, DC, like a lot of cities had that kind of framework. And, there was like delivery services. It was kind of crazy. So I'm kind of an extremist where I want to see, really, really, really affordable product everywhere. I would
Yeah.
also love to see, more boutiquey, more expensive designer product, if that's a way to look at it. Um, I'm pushing to eventually have, purchasable LSD at Walmart without a
Yeah.
prescription. That's kind of like the how far I want to go. But, we have to figure out how to stop law enforcement coming after us, and then figure out a way to have a good, tested, safe supply of all of these drugs. From plant medicines to LSD, 2CB, MDMA, etc., to even drugs that this scene doesn't seem to love so much. Like imagine if there was a known potency fentanyl or a known potency heroin that people could buy, and
Yeah.
therefore they would only willfully overdose.
Yeah.
Only overdose if you actually want to kill yourself, right? As opposed to regular users that the government's just abusing all of us here. Like, they should be trying to keep us safe, and they've twisted the narrative such that they're making money off of putting us in prison, and that's really not okay.
I could go on about for-profit prisons for a very, very long time, and all of the obviously
do your next episode on that. It's good. They need to learn.
Yeah, moral and the ethical issues on that. But like, it's just so interesting, just like what drug education is, and like how it is so controlled from these good and bad drugs, and like not actually educating you on the actual effects on them. It's just educating you based on what somebody else is trying to control. I mean, it's all control. It has nothing to do with education.
Right. Control, profit, race dynamics. Like, obviously it's not a good scene in Texas if you're a black man, you get caught with cannabis. Like, that could be 10 years or a decade, even for a gram, like, or 2 decades for a gram. So
yeah.
Like, count your blessings, especially that we live here in Colorado, where that's not really a thing for small possession.
Yeah. I mean, it's, we're blessed to be in a state where I guess we are one of the leaders in creating this legal framework. But I mean, it is interesting, kind of back to your point about how, they're doing this either clinical or non-clinical model where it's still pretty highly regulated and sort of scrutinized, and how with cannabis, like, that was never even a discussion that like, oh, you have to do cannabis in the presence of somebody, so like it's safe to do it. I mean, I understand that they're obviously very, very different experiences.
Or watch you smoke.
Yeah, exactly. But like, again,
no,
if you just have proper drug education to begin with, like, you don't have to worry about necessarily always having the legal framework. I love it there as an option. I really do. And there are people that will never, ever do it without that option. But like, there needs to be the underground shaman that can also, help you, that's been doing this for 15 years. That's only going to charge you, $100 to $200. Like, that needs to be legal as well.
Agreed. Yeah. I think churches need to get more active in serving their communities. Like, any church could theoretically spin up a very low cost ketamine assisted psychotherapy practice legally in this country.
Yeah.
I see no reason why they shouldn't do that if they care about their people's mental health, which ostensibly they do. Then, how do we just figure out what is this long-term pluralistic approach? How can we have like 10 different options in every country of ways to access, from community to religious to individual access to, maybe some sort of retreat framework, a medical framework. And then, Cluster Busters, a really important nonprofit doing cluster headache work with LSD and psilocybin. They actually, as a nonprofit, will teach people how to go through these protocols on their own. And guess who's not in the room with them when they're consuming mushrooms? Like, a therapist. And they've been going for decades and decades, and helping lots of people with their chronic pain conditions. So I think there's limitations on this whole conversation around, should a therapist be there all the time? And Oregon kind of handled that nicely, where it's like, you can just roll in, and as long as you're out of high school, no violent offenses, take the training, you're good to be a facilitator, which I think is a good deal. Except I think the government's going to really make this a rough situation. Are you familiar with like the tax differences on alcohol versus cannabis?
I'm not super familiar with it, but I know that cannabis is much, much higher.
Yeah, it's incredible. And if they took a realistic harms approach to tax structure here, alcohol tax would be way higher, cannabis tax would be way lower. And what happens is you have more people buying from regulated, tested, known known safe cannabis, because we all know, hopefully, that some underground growers aren't following good safe practices. Many are, but I don't know if I can say most.
Yeah,
black market growers.
When I was in Chicago before I came here, so Chicago is a legal recreational state for cannabis, but just the way that they tax it and rolled it out, it's so expensive to get it. I'd be paying $70 for an eighth of weed. That was like the cheapest that I could get. And so with that in mind, I never went to a dispensary one time.
Black market prices.
We would continue to use the black market. Like why the hell would I ever pay that much when I can get it for literally 50% or more cheaper than what you're going to offer it to me for?
Yeah, exactly. And if we want people to stay in a safe, regulated framework, we need to have our incentives structured properly. Like taxes need to be set at an appropriate level, not at like an extortionist level, right?
Yep.
So how do we solve that problem? More political action. It sucks, but it's, without the people standing up and getting loud, it won't change. And we all want better cannabis law and policy. I'm okay buying corporate weed. I'm not okay paying like insane taxation on top of it. But again, I would always rather have like boutique-y underground weed. But edibles, like I prefer edibles from a store because it's a known dose, right?
Yeah, that can always get dicey. But man, with that, I want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing some of your stories and what you see going on in the psychedelic world today. And I'm excited to see how it continues to evolve and continue to use Psychedelics Today as a resource to help me stay on top of it.
Oh yeah, love it. Thanks for having me. Love being here.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to this week's episode. If you have any thoughts or questions, be sure to shoot me an email, tripsittingblog@gmail.com, or shoot me a DM on social media. And then also be sure to also subscribe to my weekly newsletter, Trippy Mondays, where I go over 3 things that really caught my attention from the past week, filled with lessons, wisdom, comedy, you name it. I always keep it really short and simple. And if you hate it, you can always just unsubscribe. So go ahead and give it a shot on my website, and then just put in your email. Thanks again, everybody, for listening, and we'll see you next week.